The most unnerving thing that ever happened to me out in the woods wasn't a growl or a footstep. It was a voice. My own voice, to be exact, but it wasn't coming from me. I was deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place I've always considered a second home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in a final blaze of orange and purple. Everything was quiet, peaceful. My friend Alex was gathering firewood while I was starting to unpack our supplies. And then, from somewhere far off in the thick woods, I heard it. A whisper, carried on the wind, clear as a bell. It was my name, just Jake. It sounded exactly like me, saying my own name, but distorted, elongated, as if the forest itself was stretching the syllables. It chilled me to the bone, a coldness that had nothing to do with the evening air. Alex came back to the campsite, his arms full of kindling. "Hey, what's up? You look like you just saw a ghost." I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. A lost hiker, an echo, the sound of my own thoughts playing tricks on me in the silence. I told him what I heard, and he laughed it off. We were two guys who had been camping together since we were kids, and we were well into our 30s. We weren't easily spooked. We had picked a spot about 5 miles off the main trail in the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia, a place we'd visited dozens of times. It was a secluded clearing next to a small, meandering stream. Our tent was pitched, the fire pit was ready, and the stars were just beginning to pepper the darkening sky. The crickets were starting their evening chorus, and the low hum of the forest was a familiar comfort. We made some simple food on the camp stove, talking about work and our families, letting the normalcy of it all wash away the strange feeling that had settled over me. We were two old friends, doing what we loved, and the feeling of being watched, which I had just written off as paranoia, began to fade. But that peaceful feeling didn't last long. As we sat by the fire, talking, I heard it again. This time it wasn't my name. It was Alex's. "Hey, Alex," it said, a perfect mimicry of my voice. The voice came from the opposite side of the clearing from where I was sitting, near the line of trees. Alex looked at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Was that you?" he asked. I shook my head slowly, feeling my heart begin to pound. I didn't say anything. We fell silent, listening. The sound of our fire crackling suddenly felt too loud. Then, from another direction, came a faint, distorted snippet of a conversation we'd had earlier about my car trouble. "Blown gasket," the voice whispered, impossibly clear, then dissolved into a low, rattling sound that was almost a laugh. We both stood up, grabbing our flashlights. I swept my beam across the trees, but the light just seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. Nothing moved. No eyes gleamed back at us. No sound but the crickets and the crackling fire. It was all impossibly specific, impossibly accurate. It wasn't just echoing sound. It was repeating our words, our voices. It felt like the forest itself was listening and learning. We decided to just get in the tent and call it an early night. The idea of packing up and leaving felt ridiculous, a panicked reaction to a sound we couldn't explain. But inside the tent, the feeling only intensified. The whispers started again, this time from directly outside the thin nylon wall. Our names. A low, distorted repetition of our names, as if someone was learning to say them. Then the sound of a zipper being unzipped, a perfect mimic of our tent door. We both froze, our breaths caught in our throats. The zipper sound stopped, then started again, slow and deliberate, on the other side of the tent. It wasn't a zipper, we knew that. It was something else, something trying to imitate the sound, to mock us. The thing was playing with us. A feeling of pure, primal dread washed over me. This wasn't an animal, or a human. It was something that understood our fear, something that was toying with it. We lay there in the dark for what felt like hours, listening to the disembodied sounds of our lives being replayed outside. A quiet cough, the clink of a metal cup, a mumbled word. Each sound was a perfect copy, yet subtly wrong, off-key in a way that made my skin crawl. We knew we couldn't stay. We had to leave, right now. With our hearts hammering against our ribs, we made the silent decision to get out. We unzipped the tent door and slipped out into the cold night. The world outside was perfectly silent. No whispers, no fake zipper sounds, nothing. We didn't even bother to pack our gear. We grabbed what was essential, our car keys, our flashlights, and started walking. We moved as fast as we could in the dark, the faint beam of our lights cutting through the oppressive blackness of the trees. We had made it maybe 100 yards from the clearing when we heard it again, this time a sound that ripped through the quiet night and stopped me in my tracks. A scream, high-pitched, desperate, and filled with a terror that I recognized instantly. It was Alex's scream, the sound of a man in his final, gasping moment of fear. I turned my head, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the trees, expecting to see something horrific, expecting to see Alex being dragged into the dark. But he was right there next to me, just a few feet away, his face pale and his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The scream wasn't coming from him. It was coming from somewhere behind us, impossibly loud and echoing through the pines. The sound was a perfect copy of a sound that had never happened. It was a scream that my friend had never made, being played for us in the middle of nowhere, as if to show us exactly what was waiting for us. We didn't need to see it. We just ran. We ran all the way to the car, and we drove away without ever looking back. We never talked about what happened in those woods, and we never went camping again, not a single night. But the memory of that sound still haunts me, sometimes, late at night, in the silence of my apartment. I'll hear a low rattling sound, not quite a voice, but almost a perfect imitation of my own breathing. I'll hear my name whispered from the next room, and when I call out, there's no reply. It's just me, and the memory of something in the woods that learned what I sounded like, and never forgot. The unsettling thing about what happened wasn't a growl or a footstep. It was something I found hanging from a tree. A small effigy, a fetish of woven twigs and what looked like clumps of hair, tied with a strip of what I could only describe as animal hide. It was crude, but deliberate. It wasn't a piece of trail art. It felt personal and deeply wrong. I was hiking a lesser-known trail in the Olympic National Forest in Washington State. The woods here are a cathedral of green, ancient and silent. I'd been walking for hours, enjoying the solitude, the oppressive hush of the temperate rainforest. That's when I saw it, about 10 feet off the trail, swaying gently from a vine-covered branch. I knew immediately I should have left it alone, but a morbid curiosity made me step closer. The air felt heavy and thick, and a sense of wrongness settled over me. I took a picture of it, then turned and continued my hike, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a strange piece of art left by some eccentric. I found my spot later that day, a perfect secluded clearing beside a mossy stream, tucked away from the main path. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. The canopy was so thick that only slivers of light made it to the forest floor, and the silence was total. No birds chirped, no small animals scurried, just the steady, rhythmic drip of water from the leaves and the quiet gurgle of the stream. It was beautiful, but the silence had an edge to it, a heaviness that felt unnatural. I set up my tent, a small, unassuming dome, and started to gather firewood. As I moved deeper into the undergrowth, I noticed another one of those effigies. This one smaller and more tangled, almost hidden in the underbrush. And then another, a few feet away. I found a total of 5, all within a small radius of my campsite. Each one slightly different, but all made of the same strange materials. They were like a breadcrumb trail, leading deeper into the dark, silent forest. My rational mind told me to pack up and leave, but my stubborn, arrogant self-reliance kicked in. I had come out here for solitude, and I wasn't going to let some weird totems scare me off. I made a fire, ate a simple meal, and watched the last light fade from the sky. As night fell, the sounds of the forest began to shift. The constant drip of water was replaced by a new sound, a faint, rhythmic scratching. It sounded like something with long claws dragging slowly down the bark of a tree. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. The scratching continued, a steady, deliberate rhythm that seemed to be circling my camp, moving from tree to tree. I tried to convince myself it was a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal, but the sound was too slow, too methodical. It would stop for a moment, then start again, a few feet closer. It was a sound that had intent behind it. I lay in my tent, my heart thumping against my ribs, and listened to the scratching get closer. It stopped directly behind my tent. The silence that followed was worse than the scratching. I held my breath, listening, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard a faint rustling, and I saw a dark shape moving against the pale light of my phone screen. I turned my head, and I saw it. Hanging from a branch just outside my tent flap was one of the effigies I had found earlier, the one with the small bird bones tied to it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The effigy was nowhere near my camp when I saw it last. Something was watching me. Something was moving these things. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, a trick of the light. But no, it was unmistakable. I spent the rest of the night with my flashlight on, sweeping the beam back and forth through the trees. A useless gesture in the face of whatever was out there. The scratching had stopped, but I felt a cold dread that was far worse than the sound. I felt like I was the main event in some strange, ancient ritual. Sometime after midnight, the scratching began again, but this time it was different. It was faster, more frenzied, like something was scraping its claws with a terrible urgency. And then, a new sound began, a low, guttural humming that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. The humming was not coming from one direction. It was coming from all directions at once. It vibrated through the ground, through my sleeping bag, and into my bones. It felt like the forest itself was groaning, and the scratching was the sound of something trying to claw its way out of the ground. The humming intensified, a deep, resonating sound that made my teeth ache. The flimsy nylon walls of my tent felt as thin as paper. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that I had to get out. I fumbled for the zipper, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I managed to get it open, and I scrambled out of the tent, shining my flashlight out into the blackness. The humming and scratching stopped instantly. My light cut a frantic arc through the trees, and then it caught something. It was tall and gaunt, standing impossibly still, about 100 feet away. It wasn't an animal. It was impossibly thin, almost like a shadow made solid. My flashlight beam didn't seem to illuminate it so much as warp around it, making its form indistinct and hard to focus on. I could just make out that it was holding something, and as my beam hit it, I saw what it was, a new effigy. This one was larger than the others, and tied into its woven twigs and twine was a long, dark clump of what looked like human hair. My hair. It was too far away to be certain, but I felt a profound sense of recognition and dread. I stumbled backwards, fumbling to zip the tent closed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night curled in a ball, too terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, the humming and the figure were gone, but hanging from a branch next to my tent door, a new effigy swayed in the morning breeze. It was bigger than the others, and a long, dark strand of hair was unmistakably woven into it. I didn't look closer. I didn't need to. I packed up my gear in a blur of panicked motion and hiked out of those woods, never looking back. I never went camping alone again. I still have a hard time looking at my own reflection, and sometimes, When I'm walking past a window, I'll catch a glimpse of my own hair and feel the cold certainty that a piece of me, a small, dark part of my essence, is still back there, hanging from a tree, woven into an effigy I never should have found. The most terrifying sound I've ever heard was a scream. Not a human scream, but something that sounded like it was torn from a creature that never should have existed. My girlfriend, Chloe, and I were camping in a state park in Colorado, a place called Golden Gate Canyon. It was late fall, off-season, and we had the whole place to ourselves. The air was crisp, the aspens were bare, and the stars were impossibly bright. We set up our tent by a small, gurgling creek and had a fire going by dusk. Everything felt peaceful, the kind of stillness you crave when you live in the city. But the silence had a strange quality to it. There were no crickets, no rustling animals, no far-off owl calls. It felt like the entire valley was holding its breath. The quiet was so total, so absolute, that it felt like an absence, a void waiting to be filled. We sat by the fire, talking and laughing, enjoying the rare solitude. It was the kind of night that felt like a postcard, until the silence finally broke. It started as a low wail, a sound so far away it could have been the wind. But as it grew louder, it became something else entirely. It was a high-pitched, desperate scream that rose and fell, a sound of profound agony. It wasn't an animal I could identify. It wasn't a mountain lion or a coyote. This was a sound of pure torture, a prolonged wailing shriek that cut through the night like a blade. It echoed through the canyon, and my blood ran cold. Chloe grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. We tried to rationalize it, to call it something we could understand, but the sound was wrong. It was too sustained, too full of a pain that wasn't physical. It ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. We spent the next hour just sitting there, listening, huddled closer to the fire. Our conversation gone, just as we were thinking about turning in, the sound returned. This time, it was closer. It began with the same high, pained shriek, but this time, something new was added to the mix. It was a quick series of high-pitched chirps, like a child's wind-up toy being cranked too fast, or the sound of something small and brittle being twisted and broken. The two sounds intertwined, the awful wail and the frantic, mechanical chirping, and it was moving. It sounded like it was circling our campsite, moving through the trees with impossible speed. We grabbed our flashlights, our beams cutting through the oppressive darkness, but we saw nothing. No eyes reflected back at us, no branches moved, nothing. The sound stopped right on the other side of the creek, and we held our breath, listening to the rushing water. Then we heard a new sound, a slow, methodical, dragging sound coming from the creek bed. It sounded like something heavy was being pulled against the current, scraping along the rocks. It was slow and deliberate, and it was getting closer. We shone our lights towards the water, but again, nothing. The dragging stopped, and the silence returned, now even more terrifying than before. We didn't talk about it. There was nothing to say. We just sat there, waiting for the sun to rise, our fire, our only comfort in the face of a threat we couldn't see or understand. Hours passed. Chloe must have drifted off, her head on my shoulder, exhausted by the terror. But I was wide awake, my senses on high alert, listening to every whisper of the wind. That's when I heard it. A new sound, one that froze me in place and made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. A low, scraping whisper, so close it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. It was my name, Leo, it whispered, a sound made of gravel and rustling leaves. A putrid, rotten scent, like a mix of dead meat and stagnant water, washed over me. I felt a cold presence behind me, a profound and terrible emptiness. I slowly turned my head, my heart hammering against my ribs, and my flashlight beam caught it. It was standing at the edge of the firelight, impossibly tall and thin. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over a gaunt, skeletal frame. Its limbs were long and gangly, and it was completely naked. Where its face should have been, there were two large, empty, black sockets, like holes burned through the skin. It had no mouth, but I heard the whisper again, right by my ear. I was frozen in a primal terror, a fear so profound it stole my voice. The thing raised a long, bony arm, and I saw what it was holding. It was a dead rabbit, its insides gone, its fur matted with grime. The creature was swinging it back and forth, and as it did, I heard the high-pitched chirping sound from earlier, a sound that was somehow coming from the dead animal itself. The sound of something being twisted and broken, played for me on the husk of a dead thing. The sight of it, the smell of it, the horrifying sound, it broke the spell of my terror, and I let out a guttural scream that woke Chloe with a jolt. She looked at me, bewildered, then turned her head to where I was pointing. But it was gone. The smell was gone. The silence had returned. We tore down the tent in a blur of motion, leaving the majority of our gear behind. We ran to the car, and we drove away without ever looking back. I still see its face sometimes, in the dark corners of a room, and I still have to fight the urge to check my rearview mirror every time I'm in my car, just to make sure I'm alone. I know the old stories about things in the woods, about the Wendigo and other creatures, but this felt different. It wasn't a hunter looking for a meal. It was something that had heard our fear, and it had simply wanted to play a game. And the last thing I heard, as I drove away, was a low, scraping whisper of my name, a sound that told me the game wasn't